We start, Michelle.
Yep, I'm ready to go.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. Welcome to our Behavior at Home webinar series presented by the Family Focus Resource Center, Advanced Behavioral Pathways. Family Focus Resource Center provides parent-to-parent support, information and education for families that live in the North Los Angeles County, and Advanced Pathways. Behavioral Pathways is an agency that provides behavioral services to children and adults. We are collaborating on this 5-part series of webinars offered in English and Spanish. My name is Dr. Ivor Weiner. I am the principal investigator of the Family Focus Resource Center, and I work on the CSUN campus, and I, along with Michelle, will be hosting this webinar and helping with the Q&A. Before we start, I want to provide some information about how the webinar will work. All attendees are currently muted so that there's no background noise. You might hear the gardeners, the leaf blower in my background. They'll be gone soon. All attendees are currently muted so that there's no background noise. You'll be able to see the presentation on your screen, which you now see. We will have some time for questions and answers at the end. If you have a question, you can either type it in the chat box in the bottom of your navigation bar, it's chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll unmute your audio. To raise your hand, click on the icon labeled participants that's right next to chat at the bottom of your screen. At the bottom of the window on the right side of the screen, click the button labeled raise hand. This is your digital hand and it is now raised. Don't worry about taking notes. We will provide a handout and some downloadable resources after the presentation on our website. The link is provided in the chat box, which will be used. This is week 3 of our 5-week series, and we'll be talking about behavior basics. And one of the challenges parents are facing is understanding and managing difficult behavior at home. This webinar will help you understand what behavior communicates and effective strategies to help you meet those needs. We will cover functions of behavior, how to respond to challenging behavior, teaching missing skills, and seeing behavior as communication to inform parenting strategies. So let me go ahead and introduce our presenter, who is a great friend of Family Focus Resource Center. Michelle is a board-certified behavioral analyst, BCBA as they call it, and the clinical director of Advanced Behavioral Pathways. Michelle has presented to a variety of audiences, including parents, educators, and other professionals on a variety of topics, including parent education, ABA, applied behavior analysis, legislation, behavior management, and autism spectrum disorder. She provides behavioral services to students of all ages and skill levels across the Santa Clarita, Antelope, and San Fernando Valleys through her company, Advanced Behavioral Pathways. And they always strive to meet the unique needs of the disability community. So I'm going to hand it over and thank Michelle for doing this 5-week series. We really appreciate it. So over to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Dr. Weiner. I'm really excited to be back again. Hopefully some of you joined us for week 1 or week 2. This week 3 is really going to build on what we learned last week. So if you didn't see the webinar last week, that's okay. But I would encourage you to go back and watch that, as you'll hear me reference some of the strategies that we taught last week in the webinar today. So like Dr. Weiner shared, we're going to talk about behavior basics today. And the first thing we're going to talk about is just behavior as communication. Then we're going to go through some of those basics of behavior, including the ABCs, the function, looking at some teaching missing skills, and how to respond to some of those challenging behavior. And then as we spoke about last week, that prevention is really key. You know, if I just taught you how to respond to challenging behavior, it wouldn't really be teaching you the best of the best strategies we have. The best strategies we have are really proactive in how to prevent challenging behavior. And so we're going to revisit that a little bit today. If you were with us for the last couple weeks, thanks for coming back. That is really exciting to me. If you were joined us 3 weeks a row. This week is a little content heavy, so I'm going to be going a little bit faster than I typically have in the past. But hopefully, if it's too fast, you can go back and rewatch. You can look at the handouts, and the PowerPoint is available on the Family Focus website. Kathleen, if you could put the link in the chat, that would be great for our attendees. So as a behavior analyst and as a parent, it's really important to remember that behavior is communication. All our behavior communicates something to those around us. And especially with our children, if they're don't have really great communication abilities, they don't have really great vocal abilities to use their words to communicate their needs, then they may use behavior. And sometimes that may be challenging behavior to get those needs met. So first and foremost, when we see challenging behavior, when we're dealing with challenging behavior, we really need to ask ourselves, what is this behavior communicating? What is the need? What is the want behind that behavior? And possibly, how could we replace that behavior by teaching them to do something that is more adaptive than a challenging behavior? So really ask yourself, what is being communicated by that behavior you're seeing? Are they wanting something? Are they needing something? Do they need attention? Are they trying to escape or avoid something? And we're going to talk about all those things as we keep going through. But it's really just important to really remember that all behavior is communication. So as a behavior analyst, these are kind of the real basics of our science of human behavior. We really look at what we call the ABCs of behavior. And if you've been involved in any behavior analysis intervention in your home, you've probably heard about this. But for those who are new to behavior analysis or just need a refresher, the antecedent is what comes before the behavior. So that's kind of seen as like a trigger for the behavior, or what might lead to an adaptive or a maladaptive behavior, because a behavior is really anything that we say or do. So if you're watching me, I'm using my hands to gesture while I'm talking, that's behavior. We often will, hear people say, oh, they didn't have any behavior today. Well, that's a really bad thing, because that means they didn't do anything, and they're likely dead, unfortunately. So when we say a person doesn't have behavior, what we usually mean is they didn't have any challenging behavior. But really, behavior is both positive behavior, neutral type behavior, and challenging behavior. The consequence is the action that follows that behavior. So it's kind of what we're getting out of doing that behavior. And we're going to talk a lot about these ABCs. But when you see an ABC pattern, you have to remember that the first thing you notice is that behavior. Your child starts screaming. That's what you're going to notice. And then you have to kind of think back to what happened before. And sometimes that's really apparent, but sometimes it's harder to identify. So because we see behavior first, when we teach these ABCs, we teach what is the behavior first. So again, a behavior is anything a person says or does. It can be positive, it can be challenging, and we really try to focus on behaviors that we can see, observe, and measure, although there's other behaviors that we can't really see or measure, like thinking, that we might take into consideration during assessments. But today we're really going to focus on behaviors that we can observe. So this ABC pattern is very familiar to most families. You take your child to the store, they're walking amongst the aisles, all of the candy and things that children like are typically at eye level, so they see it in the store, and then the behavior that you observe is crying. And if the child is successful at getting candy with that crying behavior, then this might be the ABC pattern that you see. And if this was the pattern that you observed, then you could bet that this is going to be repeated. That crying behavior was rewarded with candy, so the child is likely to continue to engage in that behavior as they go about their day. So next time they go to the store, they may cry again to get that candy. So what we learn from this is that giving somebody what they want following that challenging behavior, so the crying kid in the candy store, when we give them what they want in the moment, we give them the candy in the moment, it may make it better right then. They stop crying. They're happy because they have candy. But what we don't realize is that we're really making it worse in the long run. We've rewarded challenging behavior, and now what we would see is that challenging behavior is likely going to increase in the future. So while it gets better in the moment, it's going to get worse in the long run. So they're more likely to engage in that challenging behavior in the future to get what they want. So it's really important to keep in mind that when parenting, you really don't want to reward those challenging behaviors, because what you're doing is you're strengthening them. You're giving them fuel, and you would expect those to increase or continue in the future. So then we move on to teaching what is an antecedent. So this is anything that happens before a behavior. And like I mentioned, we often call it a trigger. So this picture that you see here is my, absolute favorite antecedent every morning. And I'm totally joking because I'm not a morning person. So the alarm clock goes off, and that's the antecedent that triggers me getting out of bed or possibly smashing my alarm clock, which would be a challenging behavior, but it triggers some behavior. In our home, triggers might be things like a verbal direction. So your child is sitting watching television, you give them a verbal direction to engage in an academic activity because they're home from school and you're doing school at home, or even during a routine activity, you give them a direction to take the garbage out or do some chore. That verbal direction is an antecedent, or could be an antecedent, and then you would see a behavior. Either they follow the direction, or they may continue engaging in their current activity and not follow the direction. Triggers can also be things like lack of attention. So sometimes that would be harder to observe, but you see a child who's in an attention deprived state for a period of time, and that might trigger some behavior because they want to seek to get attention. So really any change in the environment can serve as an antecedent. So, to give a really big example, if you're in your house right now and the fire alarm goes off, the smoke detector, that would be an antecedent for you to get up and turn that off to avoid that really annoying sound. So any change in our environment could be a trigger for some behavior or an antecedent. A consequence is what comes after the behavior. So this is typically how we respond to the behavior. So with the smoke detector, it goes off. That's the antecedent. Your behavior is to get up and turn it off. The consequence is now you've avoided that really annoying noise. Some of the ones that we use with our children are things like praise or giving a reward, or sometimes ignoring that behavior. And that could be a consequence for a behavior we want to decrease if it's an attention-seeking behavior and we don't want to attend to that, so we ignore. But keep in mind that for teenagers, ignoring them could actually be rewarding them, because sometimes things kind of change and teenagers really sometimes don't want our attention. So my son went through a real period of time where leaving him alone was the biggest reward I could give him. So we really kind of have to think about how those consequences interact with our children's behavior and how they respond to them, because they're all going to be individual to how they respond to those different consequences. So that's the ABCs. Here's the effects of consequences. So there's really about 4 effects, and they can increase positive behavior. So if we provide some type of reward, we can actually increase positive behavior. We can increase challenging behavior, and I'm going to give some examples of how that could happen. And it could happen kind of on accident, that we increase a challenging behavior. Maybe we're responding in the moment and we're giving them that candy to make them stop crying in the grocery store, but what we don't realize if we just made it worse, and we can increase that challenging behavior. We can also decrease positive behavior. So your child could be engaging in some positive behavior, and we provide some type of punishing consequence, and it can decrease that behavior. We can also use consequences to decrease challenging behavior. And as we go through, we're going to talk about how we can use those consequences to mold the behavior to be the way that we want it to be. And while we talk about how this relates to children, keep in mind that this is based on the science of human behavior, and it works with everybody. So if you have a trouble with your spouse, you can also use these same principles to influence their behavior. You can use it on your children, and you can use it in the community. You can even use it with yourself. So I give a lot of examples of kids, but this really applies to everyone. So here's an example of an ABC pattern, is that the child has no attention. So they're in that attention deprived state, and they see mom and they say, "Hey mom," in a really nice, calm tone. Well, moms, we're really busy. So at times we might ignore that behavior because we're on our way to the kitchen to make dinner, or we're attending to our other child, or we're on the phone, we're really busy. So we might ignore that behavior. That behavior of saying, "Hey mom," in a nice, calm tone may decrease because they didn't get what they wanted while engaging in that behavior. So here's another example. The child now still has no attention. They see mom, and now they yell, "Mom," or they grab you, or they pull at you. Well, that behavior is more intense, and so we may respond to that behavior. Even if we respond by saying, "What?" And you maybe use a harsh tone because they've, interrupted other activities, that response may reinforce that behavior, and that yelling mom might increase. So this is an example I use often when I'm teaching, where your child may say something nicely to you, and you may not even hear them, or you may not be attending, or you're busy. So then they try to get your attention again, and it's a little bit more forceful, and you may not attend, and then they even more forceful, and then you finally attend. So that more forceful or yelling response from the child got the reinforcement. So next time they're just more likely to yell than use that nice tone. So what this reminds us is that we can increase challenging behavior by the way we respond to it, and we need to really remember to respond to appropriate behavior with rewarding consequences, and respond to inappropriate behavior with consequences that may decrease that behavior. So like I mentioned, we can increase challenging behavior if we're not careful and thoughtful about our responses. So we really want to think about today how we can learn to respond to both positive and challenging behavior in a way that's going to influence those behaviors in the way that we want. And how we respond to behavior is really, really important. When I say we, I mean you as the primary caregiver, or you as the person who's most likely to interact one-on-one with your child. However, how others respond is also really important. So if have multiple adults in the home, or you have children of varying ages where you may have siblings who are interacting with one another and shaping that behavior, you really want to make sure that there's whole family education on some of these things. Because if one parent is acting and responding one way, and another parent is reinforcing that challenging behavior, then that child is going to be really confused. And that challenging behavior is likely to continue because someone in their environment is reinforcing it. So if you have multiple family members in your household, it may be important to have a family meeting and say, this is the behavior problem that we're seeing in the child. This is how we think we should respond to it, and kind of have a team approach. I know when my son was really young, and even now, my son is 19 now, but he was a real handful when he was younger. And I'm a single parent family, but I have my parents who are very helpful and very involved in my life. And I would always have to coach them on how to respond to my son's challenging behavior, so that they didn't inadvertently, strengthen that behavior in my absence, or even if I'm there, they might, give him the cookie while he's screaming instead of, withhold until he asks nicely. And to me, it was always important that they would follow my lead on what we were doing, so that we could have that kind of team approach. So just think about that and how you can work on that in your own household. And I know that's really challenging for a lot of families. I work in a lot of family homes where that is, really difficult. I even work in classrooms where you have multiple adults, and you got to teach all the adults to be on the same page as far as how to respond to challenges, or it can be more difficult. So something that we teach is that all behaviors have a function. They all serve a function for the person engaging in that behavior. And we teach 4 functions of behavior, which we're going to go through. And I say we teach 4 because there's, even debate within behavior analysis that maybe there's 5 or maybe there's 6, or you might hear me teach these 4 today and then attend another course where they teach a different 4. And they're very similar, but they may just call them different names. I find that this is the easiest way for me to really understand it and for me to teach parents is these 4 functions. So just know that if you go to another webinar, doesn't mean that they're wrong and I'm right. It just means that we might be teaching things a little bit differently. And why this is critically important, because how we respond to behavior really should be based on the function that behavior is serving. And we're going to talk about that throughout the 4 functions of how to respond based on that function and why that's important. And those strategies that we use to address challenging behavior, again, have to be function-based. If they're not based on the function of behavior, then they may not be successful at reducing that challenging behavior. So what we do in behavior analysis is always called function-based intervention. And so we have to think about what function that behavior is serving for that individual. So as a parent, when you start to look at these challenging behaviors and these ABC patterns, really start to ask yourself, what function is this serving? What are they trying to get through engaging in this behavior? And how can I address that so that the behavior will decrease in the future? And you may even want to ask yourself, how would I respond so that would increase, so you know what not to do? So the first function I'm going to teach, and they're not in any particular order, but this is one of my favorite ones because we see this often, especially with younger children, and I'm sure a lot of you parents are experiencing this right now when you're trying to get your children to engage in schoolwork at home, is escape behavior. So this is any behavior that is aimed at escaping or avoiding something. So either, they might run away, they might hide, they might just scream so that you remove a demand. One that I see commonly that I think is funny, although not funny, but it is pretty cute when you see kids do this, and some of them do it with real skill, is distracting the parent with something else. So I was at a home and watching a child do homework with a parent, and the child was doing some refusal comments. I don't want to do it. Homework is stupid. And then the child started telling the mom how they were going to move to grandma's house. And mom and the child had a very long conversation about moving to grandma's house and how that would work or how it wouldn't work and what he should pack. And so for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, the child totally escaped all of that homework by distracting the parent with a conversation about something completely off topic. And that happens often where, kids might just start talking about something else or, kind of, hey, look over there, and distracts our attention from the activity that was in front of us. And kids can be really skillful at this. So, kind of think about your own child and what escape behaviors they might engage in. The one I see most often in my household is continuing to play video games when mom told you to do a chore. So mom has given you a direction and you're continuing your current activity instead of listening. Those can all be seen as escape behaviors. And there's many more, but I just wanted to give you some examples. If an escape behavior works, it's more likely to occur in the future. So if I allow my child to continue playing video games and I take out the trash, that was really successful for them. They're likely to continue to ignore my directions in the future. So it's really, really important as a parent to be prepared to maintain that demand when faced with an escape behavior. And we have to do this in school all the time. You know, we will have a child who will say, I'm not doing that math paper. And we have to maintain that demand. And what I teach is to maintain the demand until a natural transition. So you can't, even in school, we cannot maintain a demand until 10 o'clock at night because the kids have to go to lunch and they have to go home for the day. Even in a home setting, it can be really challenging to maintain a demand over a long period of time. So at some point, you might have to say, okay, I know I asked you to take a bath, but it's now 9 o'clock at night. They're not taking a bath. It's now time for bed. And the demand just changes from bath to bed. So that does happen. And one of the really, really important things, we're going to talk about responding by function, but with this one, you really need to be prepared. Because if they engage in a lot of escape behaviors, you need some type of prevention plan, which is a plan to prevent those escape behaviors from ever occurring so that they don't occur and the child will follow the directions that are given. And we're going to talk about that in responding. So I'll keep going on to our next function. Some behaviors occur for an attention function. They want attention from their parent, from their sibling, from their friends, from other people. They may even want attention from their dog. I have one client who really likes attention from the family dog and will seek it in inappropriate ways. They might ask for attention, you know, hey mom, play with me. Mom, will you read with me? Or they might ask their sibling, or they might ask dad, hey, you know, come outside and play with me. They want that attention. They may, you know, do things that say, hey, look at me. You know, it's can be challenging behavior just to get a response or just to get you to look at them and attend. These can be really challenging because sometimes you have to attend to the behaviors because they're dangerous. I had a child who was, you know, climbing all the furniture in the home and it was dangerous and we had to attend. So we're going to talk about how to respond to those. So they could also just be engaging in challenging behavior just simply to get that response. So what's important to consider when you're looking at attention-seeking behaviors is my philosophy is that all children and all people really have a level of attention that they need. And I really use the metaphor of a Starbucks cup because some children need a venti level of attention. They need a lot of attention to meet that attentional need through the day. And then some kids need a lot less parental attention. This could even be differences in peer attention. Some kids need a lot of peer attention and some need less. And we can see this in adults too. You know, you have a family member who's constantly posting on social media just to get attention. We all have some level of attentional need. They may first engage in positive behavior to get attention if they have the skill to do that. And if that doesn't work, then they can move to challenging behavior because eventually parents are going to respond because they have to. So you can even think about how kids might engage in challenging behavior to get peer attention because positive behaviors don't necessarily get peer attention, but challenging behavior might. So think about your child, and if you have multiple children, they're all different, likely. How much attention does your child need? And how are you going to go about providing that adequate attention throughout the day? And for some of those strategies, you might need to go back to week 1 about schedules and activity schedules, and how can you actually schedule time to provide adequate attention to all of your children. And that might be very difficult, but you can recruit the help of others if you need to. Here's another example of an ABC pattern where the antecedent might be hard to identify. So the first thing you see is a student screams in class, and there's no trigger to that behavior. They weren't given a direction, nobody said or did anything to them, but it may be because they have limited or no attention and they scream. And when you scream in class, teachers respond immediately. Sometimes if there's multiple adults in the room, they all respond. So we can expect that that behavior would increase because it got what the student wanted. It immediately attracted attention and got that attention that they need. So that behavior is going to increase. So here's another one, is that they get attention throughout their day. So they're not in that attention deprived state. So they finish their work and they talk to others in a nice, calm tone. And then the teacher provides attention throughout the day as a consequence to that positive behavior. And we can see how we can avoid that screaming through using a pattern like this. And the finishing work and talking nicely to increase because they're getting that attention as a consequence for that behavior. The next function we're going to talk about is a tangible function. So this is where we are engaging in a behavior to get something. So it could be as simple as asking for a cookie. I had a client that wanted Dr. Pepper, and that was their request. You know, can I have some Dr. Pepper? They're seeking to gain something. They may want to get a toy from a sibling or taking something from another person. So it could be just an appropriate behavior like asking, but it could be a challenging behavior like taking or grabbing something. If the child gets what they want, they're more likely to continue to do this. So in the case of the person that I was supporting who wanted Dr. Pepper, he would just go take it from people in the community and drink it quickly. So he got it, he got what he wanted, and we could expect that that behavior would continue. So, you know, things like electronics, and that's why I use this in this picture, because I know a lot of parents are having trouble with access to electronics, and kids, you know, they want it so much, and then it's really hard to limit it, get them off of it, transition from it. It's really hard to withhold it. But this can be something that can be really problematic in a lot of houses, because as soon as they access that, then they are more likely to engage in that challenging behavior in the future. So if they access the thing they want, even for a short period of time, the behavior will increase. So as an example, if you come and grab the iPad from your hands and take it and run away, and they are able to access the game they want a minute or two before you're able to get it back, we can expect that grabbing behavior possibly to continue because it was successful. So think about that and how you might address those behaviors in your home, and we're going to talk about how we respond. Self-stimulatory or automatic behaviors, these can be some of the most challenging to intervene with, and I would encourage you, if you have a lot of these types of behaviors occurring in your home, that you possibly seek out some more professional consultation, because these can be really difficult. So, and they can be challenging, and I'm going to give you some examples. They can be really positive behaviors too. So these are things that people do to provide some enjoyment or some sensation to the person. But when we're talking about people with disabilities, we often hear them referred to as stimming behaviors. They're often behaviors that happen when the person is alone. So if they're engaging in this behavior when they're alone, it very likely could be a self-stimulatory behavior. But these behaviors also include things like watching TV, reading books, or other things that we do for enjoyment. So just because it's a self-stimulatory behavior doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing, because we all do them. I gesture when I talk, that's a self-stimulatory behavior. We might tap our knee or click our pen. Those are all self-stimulatory behaviors that we might engage in that are adaptive and aren't problematic. So when are self-stimulatory behaviors a problem? Well, they're a problem when they're interfering with a person's life. So if they're interfering from you engaging in activities, or from your child engaging in schoolwork because they're engaging in the self-stimulatory behaviors all the time and you can't get them to stop, that might be a problem. If they're harmful to themselves, then we're going to talk a little bit about that. That would be something you want to address. Or if they're interfering with other activities or are challenging due to their impact to others. So I did some work with a young woman recently who had an auditory self-stimulatory behavior, meaning she was making noise, but it was so frequent and so loud that it was impacting everybody else in the house. And we really needed to address it. It was really challenging because it was hard for people to live with. And she even did it at night, keeping other people awake. So that would be problematic, even though it's not necessarily harmful. And she would still continue to do her activities while making this noise, but it was problematic for everyone around her. Self-injurious behaviors can be a form of self-stimulatory behavior, but these are ones that are harmful to the person engaging in the behavior. And they often lead to injury. And these really do require expert intervention to prevent injury. So if your child is engaging in some level of self-injurious behavior, I do really recommend that you seek expert consultation to address that behavior appropriately. If it is left alone, it could get much worse. I had a student that was putting his fingers in his mouth constantly, and it led to like gum decay and real problems with his teeth. So you really want to seek appropriate intervention if they're engaging in self-injury. Some of the types of self-stimulatory behaviors you might see is waving arms or flapping hands. We see that a lot with people on the autism spectrum. We see people walking on their toes, and that could be self-stimulatory. They might move their fingers in front of their eyes, pull their hair, nail biting, or spinning objects and kind of watching them, or moving objects in a unique manner and watching them. And you might see people looking out the corner of their eyes, or getting really low and looking at an object kind of at level of the moving object. So those are all types of self-stimulatory behaviors we see. And just keep in mind, they're not problematic unless they have one of those other impacts we talked about. So pulling hair, I would say, is probably something we want to address all the time. But if I just like spinning things, maybe we just need to teach the person when they're able to do that. So we don't always need intervention when there's a self-stimulatory behavior. Or a lot of adults I know would need intervention because some adults have these behaviors too, where we click pens or we shake our knee when we're sitting at a table, and those are all self-stimulatory. If they're allowed to continue, then we could expect that they would increase because they're being done because they're enjoyable by the person doing them. So if they're allowed to continue, they will likely increase. If they're deemed challenging, then there needs to be a plan, and this may need to be guided by an expert. So one thing we need to do is, if we're seeing a lot of challenging behavior, and we talked about this last week as well, is identify those missing skills. So challenging behavior typically indicates that there are some skills missing, because if I had the skill, I wouldn't engage in a challenging behavior. I would engage in adaptive behavior instead. So we can observe and identify what is the missing skill. So when you see that challenging behavior, ask yourself, what should they be doing instead of this challenging behavior? And then how can you make a plan to teach that missing skill? So we talked about that last week. If you want to know more, then I would encourage you to go back and watch last week. So we need to make sure that we're responding to behavior by its function. So you have to think about and determine the function the behavior is serving for that person. So you may ask yourself, why is the behavior happening? Or what are they getting from engaging in that behavior? And that may lead to you being able to say, well, they're doing it because they're trying to get the iPad, or they're doing it because they're trying to get out of going to, I was going to say going to school, but they're not going to school right now, but they may be doing it to get out of school. I was thinking about my son, when he was younger, he had just complete school refusal behaviors. Just refusing to go to school is an escape behavior. So you really want to think about, what are they getting from engaging in that behavior? And that likely leads to determining that function. So if they're engaging in a lot of escape behavior, then Prevention is key, and prevention is really key all the time. My interventions are always prevention focused, so that we can prevent challenging behavior and teach all of those skills that we need to teach. But for escape behavior, it's really critical, because once they engage in escape, it's really difficult to respond to. So you may want to reduce demands before the challenging behavior occurs. Not after, but before. So this is a prevention strategy. If they're having trouble sitting for, a full math worksheet, can we fold it in half and do half at a time? Can we break it up into smaller tasks? You want to make sure that they can do the task, that they have the skills, because if we're asking them to do something that they can't do, they're likely going to engage in escape behavior. Just like if you ask me to change the oil in my car, I don't have the skill to do that. So I'm just never going to do it because I don't know how. You want to make sure that your child has the skill. And then, so before you place that demand, make sure that they have the skill, make sure that you have the time and energy and resources to follow through, because it's really important that you maintain that demand once it's placed. So don't place demands that you can't follow through with, because they're just going to learn, that about 50% of the time, mom or dad doesn't follow through. So I don't have to follow that direction. So you really want to make sure that you can follow through and maintain that demand. So with escape behavior, the responding is really difficult, because you have to, maybe follow the child around or continue to repeat the directive. You may need to, provide some help or some choices to get that direction followed. And that's why we really have to be preventative with escape type behaviors. So if your child is engaging in a lot of attention seeking behavior, because so many of my interventions are prevention focused, you're going to see the first one is prevention. If your child has high levels of attention and are engaging in a challenging behavior to seek attention, provide attention throughout the day. So some people just need that higher levels of attention, and you need to figure out a way to kind of fill that cup of attention all throughout the day. You may want to make sure they know when attention will be available. So back to week 1, when we talked about scheduling and putting a visual in front of them to know when attention is going to be available. Make sure that you provide attention when they engage in positive behavior, so that you can reward that behavior with something that they're already seeking, that attention. And then you may want to ignore or redirect challenging attention-seeking behaviors. So if you can ignore, then you want to ignore. If you need to redirect to do something else, then you can redirect that behavior by just redirecting to a different activity, or redirecting them by giving them a direction to do something else. That's kind of that redirect strategy. If they're engaging in really challenging attention-seeking behaviors, then you may need to respond with the least amount of attention possible. So if they're climbing the walls, you may have to get them down without looking at them and without saying anything to them to keep them safe, but also not give them that attention that they're looking for. When they're engaging in behaviors that serve that tangible function, don't provide access to the things that they want if they're engaging in challenging behavior. So if they're throwing a fit to get the iPad, giving them the iPad even for a few minutes is going to reward that behavior. So you want to withhold that iPad. You want to prompt behavior that will allow them access. So if they're throwing a fit on the floor, you tell them, when you're sitting at the table calmly, they have the iPad. And then as soon as they sit at the table calmly, then you can give the iPad. You may let them know when access is going to be available. And one thing you want to do as a prevention is consider providing them more access to the things that they want when they're not engaging in the challenge. So they don't have to engage in the challenge to get access. For electronics and iPads, that can be really, really challenging because you don't want to just provide free access. But I had a child that was engaging in challenging behavior to get access to water. So we just put water play throughout the day. And good thing we live in Southern California where it's nice and warm a lot of the year. And that solved that problem. So, think about how you might be able to provide them access to those things that they want if that's appropriate or possible. If you have a child that's engaging in high levels of stimulatory behavior, you want to make sure to keep their hands and bodies engaged in some activity to provide that alternate form of stimulation. So you're kind of providing an alternate behavior. You may want to place limits on when and where that behavior is allowed. So you can spin objects in your room, but not the rest of the house. You may want to, put some limits around when that behavior can be done. You also want to provide praise when they're engaging in that alternate behavior. So when they make a choice to do the alternate, they make a choice to that sensory activity, then you can provide that praise. And like I said before, prevention is really key for all behavior challenges. So if you didn't stick around for week 2, I encourage you to go back. We talked about a lot of proactive strategies that can be implemented to really avoid a lot of these challenging behaviors. Because once the challenging behavior occurs, it's much more difficult to respond to it than it would have been to prevent it in the first place. So really think about what proactive strategies you can do to prevent those behavior challenges. And this week we went through all the 4 functions of behavior. And so now you can think back, or as you observe your child, you can see, oh, this behavior might be serving an attention function. So maybe I need to give more proactive attention and then less attention when the challenging behavior occurs to promote that more positive behavior and give them more attention throughout the day so they don't have to resort to challenging behavior to get that thing that they want. So hopefully you were able to think about your child and see what function some of their behaviors might be serving. And I do want to mention too that children engage in a variety of behaviors for all of those functions. So you may see some positive behavior to get things that they want, and then some challenging behavior to get attention. So you may want to think about how all of those things are interacting. So again, I mentioned see those simple behavior strategies that we did last week for more ideas on that prevention, because the responding can be more challenging once that challenging behavior is already occurring and you're kind of in the midst of doing that. I always teach that we kind of have to manage through challenges. So preventing them is going to be a much better way to go, but we do have to know how to respond to challenges in the moment. So hopefully this was helpful. And next week, we'll be back for something really exciting, the power of reward. Reward is also used as a consequence to behavior, but rewards will increase, and this should be really exciting to learn about other ways that we can reward positive behavior to see more of that in the future. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. If anyone wants to type their question in the chat or raise your hand in the participant bar, address those questions as they come in. Or Kathy or Ivor, if there's anything you want to follow up with.
Well, we can. I can certainly recognize people as they raise their hands as well. I can monitor that for you. But thank you so much for just really succinct, very clearly explained behaviors and their functions and some of the ways that you can deal with it. And also remember that this is a 5-part series. Next week I have 2 more in the series, right? So you can always go back and view these with the link that Kathy put up in the chat. But anyway, we'll take some questions or comments.
So somebody sent me a message that just says the first time attending live, I'm assuming, but then you watched the last 2. So that's great. They're all there on the website. They can be watched later. Another good technique might be to have other people in the household watch the ones that you think are really relevant to what you're having, what you're seeing in your house. So if you think, wow, we all need to work as a team, and that's what she was talking about here. Let me have other adults in my child's life watch this, that could be a great resource, a way to kind of get everybody on the same page. Even, the one from last week, if you're really trying to be proactive and prevent challenges and you thought that was helpful, or week 1, that might be a really good way to kind of use the tools that are there to help get everyone in your family and your household on that same page when addressing challenging behavior. Because I know in a lot of homes, that's a big struggle, is one parent is, using the tools and using the strategies, and they're scheduling and they're responding to behavior by function. And then another member of the household is responding in the moment and maybe reinforcing those challenging behaviors. And your child is just going to be, kind of confused, or they might start to really learn that, this adult in the household does one thing and this adult does something else. And they might, engage in more challenging behavior with that adult who gives into those behaviors because they're reinforced, where they may engage in better or more positive behavior with the adult who is kind of requiring that from them. So I don't know how many people watch Dr. Phil, but you see that on Dr. Phil all the time when he's, having stories about challenging behavior.
Okay, we have a raised hand. And here we go. I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead with your question. Oh, wait a minute. There you go.
Hello?
Hello, go ahead. Yes,
yes,
we can.
One of my concerns is it's trying to make another adult that doesn't understand special needs, that a child with special needs can learn a new behavior if we are all working on the same page. I find a lot of people that are first encounters with special need kids, that they should be treated, differently. I know it's a big question, or probably something that I need to keep researching.
Well, I think
teach an adult that a child with special needs can learn a new behavior, or can be taught a new behavior.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that that's a big challenge. And I know, in my work, that in some families, the child with a disability, they just do everything for them, or, they have lower expectations, or, in some families it can be actually the opposite. So I think education, so any way of, providing, we haven't done a webinar on like disability specific, how a person specifically with a disability learns, but maybe there's some resources out there. But even having them watch some of these webinars that you think are related to your child that you're focused on may help them, you can kind of tell them, this is a webinar about children with disabilities, and here we're all talking about how they learn. I think in one of the webinars I talked about children with disabilities often may need repeated trialing. So they learn, but they might need 10 trials, 100 trials before they're going to learn that skill. And so you need to build in that practice and make sure that you're providing those practice opportunities so that they can learn that skill. So they might learn at a different rate than everyone else. In fact, we all learn at a different rate. But I know when I was parenting my son when he was younger, I would just kind of always know he's going to take, hundreds of trials to learn this, where another child might learn a lot faster. How do I make time for all those learning trials? And how do I reinforce the learning over time? Something that we talk about in teaching children with disabilities is called shaping. So you might look into shaping, or I can see if I can find a resource and share it with you. I'm going to put my email in the chat, so anyone who wants to email me can do that if you have specific questions or specific resources that you need. But I think to answer your question, I would go to disability specific resources about learning as it relates to disability issues, because we all continue to learn all throughout our lives, just at different rates. So all children can learn new skills and behaviors and grow in that way. It just may be at a different rate and with specialized teaching. So thanks for the question. It was great. It's just a really tough one to answer. So hopefully that was helpful. So we're heading out toward 4 o'clock, and there's no other questions. You have my email there. They provided the website where you can go and look at the resources that are there and watch previous webinars. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and thanks for listening.
Yes, and I just want to say thank you to Michelle for hosting this, and she obviously has a wealth of information, so I hope you'll take her up if you need a resource. Family Focus is also available for you, so just let us know, and we really thank you for joining us. Remember, there are 2 others. This series 1, there's 5 in the series, webinar 1 and 2 on the website that we provided in the chat. So if you haven't seen those, catch up and join us in the next one.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Michelle, I'm gonna stay on if she's still there. I don't know if she is.
I think Michelle's gone.
Okay.
I'm going to end the meeting because I have the recording. So
Okay, I'm gonna catch you.